Hello and welcome to As Built, the podcast from Graphic Machine about architecture firms, buildings, and how both get built. I'm your host, Patience Jones. With me is your co-host, Brian Jones.
Hello.
Today's episode is the next in our series about the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art International Design Competition. Our guest today is Jeanne Gang of the firm Studio Gang. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Patience and Brian. Nice to be here.
Tell us about your firm.
Well, Studio Gang, we're an architecture and design firm. We're currently about 150 people, and I guess I'd like to say that we always think of ourselves as relationship builders, which sounds funny for architecture firm, but we think of it as how architecture can help to build relationships between people, between each other, between people and their environment. And so it's really about, setting the stage for those interactions to happen. And it's really helpful, I think, for communities to have an architecture like that sets that up. We're very much into sustainability in different ways in all of our buildings, whatever is kind of relevant for the project at hand. And yeah, that's us. I started it. I can just give you a little bit more background if you want it, as your next question I know is where we're based. So I just bleed right into that one. But it really I started in Chicago, and my first projects were community centers. And that's what really started this philosophy about understanding community, listening to people and their differences and their dreams. And so our first projects were like these community centers around Chicago, our home city where we started. And then as we got different projects, different building types, like museums, for example, and the other cultural institutions, it started to be like, how can you bring that sense of community to those project types? So even in high rises that we do, we're always thinking about, how people can have these spaces of connection and really make them feel comfortable in those different buildings. So we are based in Chicago, but that was the founding city. But then we now have offices in New York and San Francisco and Paris. Not bad. All nice cities.
What type of work is your firm known for?
I guess in general, our firm's work is divided about evenly between institutions, like cultural institutions, like theaters, higher education, public clients, with clients like state and municipalities and federal clients. And then the other half is pretty much private clients. So that's kind of the way that it divides. But really, we've worked in many different building types, but I think probably our best known ones are, these cultural institutions for organizations, and then some of our private work, which is taller buildings, like in different cities, high rises for living and for working. So I think people know that we don't just do one building type. I think that's fair to say.
What is one of your favorite projects to have worked on, and why?
I recently finished the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts in Little Rock, and that was really great because it was an institution that was already very beloved, but it just had the problem was the building was getting in the way of them really, expanding on their mission and being a place where it didn't have an identity too. So it was a kind of a very strange mix of buildings over time. And then this new addition and kind of edit, I would call it, helped to bring all the different parts together and give it a more cohesive identity, and also, again, let people connect to each other through the program and out to this park where it was sited. So that project I really loved. And it's hard to say like my favorite, but at the same time, we were finishing up the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And it was this addition, the Gilder Center, which again was working with a campus of multiple buildings, but tying them together in ways and really bringing their collections and their education spaces and their science to the forefront in the new wing. So, and just working with all the different curators there was really amazing. So those are like kind of two big recent hits that I loved.
Why did your firm decide to enter the Nelson-Atkins competition?
Well, I think it pretty much it goes along the lines of the things that we are interested in. So, like a place that is beloved, to its community, but it's also a bit of a secret. And it was like just like Kansas City, kind of like the best kept secret. It's similar in that way as a museum. It has very formidable architecture already, but there are things that are like kind of getting in the way of it being everything it can be. So it had the kind of similar challenges and opportunities, I think, than my most recent projects. I also have more than a couple of people in my office from Kansas City because having started in Chicago, we kind of a lot of people come to us from the Midwest, like kind of after they've studied maybe in big cities or on the coasts and then come back to Chicago. And I feel like Kansas City is one of those cities where people that want to work in architecture, we've been attractive to architects from there. So I kind of know it through my team members, and I think it's just another connection to Kansas City.
What have been your impressions of Kansas City so far?
Well, I think this aspect of it being a secret, a best kept secret, is really important because you in Kansas City, you have both the kind of NFL major team in sports, and you have a major art museum. And that's really amazing because cities of the size of Kansas City don't normally have both of those things. And so I feel like it's a place where everybody's really engaged, in these, major league things like the art museum, like the sports, but also still a community. So it's a thriving kind of arts community. And I really love that part of it. I also think that there's some just really fun places like when I liked going to the Peanut and just seeing like, these kind of old, very popular little bar. And it's a hangout, and it feels like a place that feels very homey and where people are really friendly. And at the same time, they have this elevated level of performance and art and sport.
What have you found to be a highlight of the museum from your visit?
One of the things I really appreciated was that there's this encyclopedic collection, something for everyone on the inside, that you get a mix of visitors there because so I saw that happening before my eyes. And then I think that the hall sculpture garden, that is something really unique to because the site is so big. There's this opportunity that a lot of museums don't have, which is to bring the art, from inside and outside. And yeah, it's very impressive to see that sighting of the museum. I think that's one thing that really, it also made me think a lot about how to kind of connect those two realms because they are seemingly so separate right now, but both of them, the indoor museum and the outdoors, really can stand on its own. But then if you think about what, the potential of connecting them, it really is exciting. So there was that. I think I also remember like going around into the spaces that no one ever sees, no visitors ever see, and trying and really understanding, the operational side of this museum. And I've always liked that in museums. There's like a American Museum of Natural History also. You would not believe all the stuff going on behind the scenes there. But that is always really interesting. So the conservation work that was happening, where the classes are being, prepared and taught, how the machinery works, and all the people that care for the museum. And that was really interesting because oftentimes those are things that kind of get shoved in a corner or in the basement or something like that. And in this case, they were very much spread out in all different, like from the attic down to the lower levels. So it was very fascinating.
What have you found most compelling and challenging about the competition brief?
Well, in a way, the challenging part is the compelling part. For me, I really like these complex buildings and these problems. And so, with the combination of this very complex museum with a very diverse collection of lots of different types of collections, and then the two buildings, of course, you have the historic iconic building, and then you have the Stephen Hall, the block building. So it's kind of like these two very different, very strong architecture. So that's like a challenge. Like, what can this new expansion be? How can you make a link between them and but be formidable on its own right? So this dialogue that you're trying to create. Just on the architectural level, there's like that responsibility, I would say, and then you have on the just on the inside and the site, the multiple levels, because the site is sloping steeply. So that's a real challenge in making it very accessible and welcoming. And, I've been really focused on how to mediate those different levels and how to make it very inviting and easy for people of all ages to be able to move through that. And so I think, in a way, if you think about, you want that building this to feel like it is really like it fits in, but it has its own personality. And, I went to see that Union Square in Kansas City. So there's like this historic, iconic building, and then an addition, but that addition has really become overused. It's really become natural for people to use it. So I think that's like that was probably a similar challenge to this, what we have here. So what I'm looking for is like, how do you fit with this classical language or this kind of abstraction of the Nelson-Atkins, but be more mediating in terms of the landscape, more like the Stephen Hall building does, stepping down the slope, and make this really preserve all these aspects of the building that people love, but just making it more accessible. So I think the museum's really done a great job with like programming and being like in creating lots of different programs that are more inclusive, like to invite people in to use it for different reasons and that. But then like if the building itself is a barrier, then that's going to prevent new audiences from coming in and experiencing the programs and the work. So that's what I feel like my job is to solve that big issue there. More approachable, especially for people that maybe they haven't been in a museum before, or, how do you create almost like breadcrumbs, to get people to get closer and have activities. And then at some point, it's like natural just to start to become in and feel invited and be part of the community and, just expand the audience that way for the museum.
What has inspired your approach to the competition brief?
Well, right at the top of the competition brief said "Museum for All," and I think that just indicates that the goal is really to find these ways to get more people to come to the museum, to partake in it, to expand the audience, and to activate the museum. We learned a lot about the people that are already really interesting groups that are coming to the museum, including teens and kids and different kinds of groups. And in thinking about all these different profiles of different potential visitors, I was really thinking about, and I should say we, because we really spent a lot of time talking about this together, where would different visitors come from and what kind of visit would they want to have. So it's about I thought a lot about this, these different entries. So in a way that the museum is growing, it's growing from being, originally just that original building that was half full when they opened, to having, to filling that out, having a new addition. Now this, in a way, this is kind of a new building that creates almost like a campus. So how does one engage with campus kind of setup? There can be different ways in for different people with different needs. And that's So that's kind of the basis of the thinking. And then making things very easy and intuitive, using light, using the directionality of the flow, giving people different choices. Those are all things that we were thinking about. So you arrive, you don't get forced into a certain agenda. You have many points where you can choose and create your own agenda, create your own visit. And also we thought a lot about, just the creature comforts of going to a museum. And, sometimes, there's no place to sit down, or you can't find the restrooms, just those kind of simple everyday things. I think that comes from just a lot of my work with different kinds of buildings, that these are things that make people feel at ease and comfortable, enjoy their visit. It wants to be, you want to focus on the art. And one of the exciting things about this brief is that there's a lot of new art gallery type spaces, but they're not the traditional, let's say, gallery spaces. So, how those connect in and how they can be linked with other programs so they can expand and contract with whatever the museum folks come up with that they want to do, or what artists want to do. This is going to be really flexible for them, so that because you can't predict what will happen in the future. Like, different performances are going to be different and art is going to be different. So give optionality to grow and shrink spaces so that it can be really useful and fun and flexible.
What trends do you foresee emerging in museum and or cultural architecture over the next decade?
Well, I see the trends, just starting with what I was talking about earlier with the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts. It actually started out as a community center. So it was a place where you could go for classes. It was a school of art and a theater and an art gallery and museum. And so, but that was funny because they didn't realize that they just grew organically over time, but they didn't realize that this is exactly what the future of the museum looks like. It is a community space. It's many more things than what we once saw as, just presentation only of art on walls. It's a much more engaging place. It's a place that this future museum it's like a place that also goes outside of its walls, because it's an organization that it's more like an organization that is infusing life with art and culture. That's, I think, where the next decade is going to take us.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It was fun to have this chat.